things over to Gary and Dean. Remote, so you don't be close.
I was just remote at home, so I might as well have it here.
Yeah, he's in control. Just so you know, there's two different perspectives here. We work together with Dean's the engineering side of it, and I'm the planner side of it. So there is some different things happening and sort of different expectations. And so just by way of introduction, I don't know if people have been, if you've been down the parkway, you'll see Inland Kenworth, the intersection of Northfield and Parkway. This area historically was an old mining area. Divers Lake area, a lot of mining activity took place over the years. And that factors into something I've just been talking about. And there is this buffer which in the previous slide that Kim showed, saw a landscape or a national tree buffer. That's something that was within our bylaws required to either retain it or replant it. So there's some options. As far as the history, one of the things as a planner, I kind of look at the site context. So the site context in my mind is there's a neighborhood context, like or a historical context. That's why I mentioned mining history. And then there's the context in the sense of the wetland here, proximity to the highway, and what have you. And I think one of the major jobs as a planner that one should be doing is looking at the site constraints, looking at the site opportunities, and that was where our discussion started with the consultants and the developer. And that was kind of one of our first discussions. We went up to the site visits. We did numerous site visits with all city staff, from the arborists to engineering staff, and we also were out there with the consultants with the arborists, engineers. So what we were able to do, I think, after a number of site visits is really analyze some of the, without going into digging and all that kind of thing, some of the real constraints, which was just basically a rock pile, no opportunity for permeability. But we did have a major asset, which was the wetland to the east. So, and plus we have the asset, or potential asset, of this green edge. But it was a little dependent on where the developer or the developer's client wanted the building. This is big, one-level slab building. Very hard to put on a site that has quite a bit of slope. It was gentle with the site. It sloped that way. And that's sort of one of the constraints that the developer actually used in his favor by maneuvering the building around. The amount of blasting that had to be done on the site was quite minimal, and also by looking at this as an opportunity, it started to formulate where on that previous slide you actually saw the building staff. Those were sort of, that was I don't know how many discussions we had, but we had the city team there, all the necessary experts started sitting around the table with the consultants. We did that regularly, and I think that helped in a sense that we were working in that collaborative way. But I since learned, I know Greg quite well. I know the consultants, Castle Engineering, and the landscape architect, Victoria Drakeford. They told me, as kind of an interesting insight, that after the city meetings, they would go away feeling quite challenged. They would say, okay, the city's challenged us, how do we respond? And that seemed to be a kind of a central theme that went through all the various, all the various conversations that we had. And I've checked with them, and that was kind of interesting to say that they went away energized. And one of the things that was kind of an interesting component in their team was Greg's response was always, well, okay, let's see, can we make it work? How much is it going to cost? This project did come over budget. It was $300,000 over budget. but I think it was through the team that was able to sort of justify to the client the increased value that was going to be added, because Inland Kenworth, their head office in Richmond, has a very green philosophy, and so I think that was something that was happening in the corporate, as part of the corporate philosophy at the time. So I think there was a number of factors that were sort of happening. It just happened to be the right group of people. We didn't sort of develop this team or anything, but I think it seemed to be that when you sit down with consultants, and when we're there with our team, it seemed that was the right start. So maybe.
Gary, can I just interject for a second?
Yeah.
Does anybody in this room have a black Dodge Ram? If they have it, you've got to move it. It's about to be towed.
I guess further to what Gary was talking about, I mean, he identified some of the constraints around the site. There were others. You can see overhead power lines in through here. The fact that Northfield Road will ultimately be 4, maybe 5 lanes. Potential interchange here. So access was limited. You can see on the first slide there's kind of an access out toward Boxwood Road, and then right in, right out was restricted on here. So there were some other constraints on that site, all of which had to be molded into what we have here. With their operation, obviously, they're looking at a lot of impermeable or impervious surface, because they have large trucks that they're operating on, doing repair and maintenance operations on those. So there's going to be a lot of hydrocarbons that are on the ground. Being that we're immediately adjacent to a Northfield marsh and ultimately tributary to the Millstone River, there's concern about the treatment of those waters before discharging on the site. As Gary mentioned previously, it was a rock site, so there was limited opportunity to do any infiltration. So we had to work through that. And obviously, looking back now, some of the methods we use there, are there better methods we could use? Are there additional ones? Sure. And on the next one, we might get to that. Because I mean, one of the things we see here, first thing you notice is this nice big black roof. You know, so there are some but it's also the appetite of the owner, the developer, to actually go that next step, as well as the consultant team. At that time, that just wasn't something that was there. But it's that incremental approach to increasing the expectations as we go through. This was the first expectation, and Craig Constable actually commented on it. This was his first development that he did, that he never put very much in the way of storm piping as one catch basin. For that, and we're not seeing it, another slide will show it, but the entire area that is impervious, only one catch basin. And the reason for that was we're looking at use of bioswales and treatment of scrubbing of the hydrocarbons that would use the vegetation, that sort of thing prior to discharge into the marsh. Another method we utilize here is using the rooftop detention, which again is a more traditional detention method, not a green detention method. But the water spills off that onto this dry creek bed and flows subsurface to get to the wetland. Knowing full well, again, as I was saying, putting this into context, Tom, again, it's clear direction that do whatever you want on site, but I want my pipes. So if we have a problem, we can, we're going to need drainage for our road here in the future, which is the DCC project. Part of that would be the storm pipe. So up to this point, it's been in the ground now for a number of years, and I don't think we've had a problem with it. So maybe we won't need storm piping in this situation.
Just before you go on, one of the interesting things is this was one of the projects we had in CAVI. People come out to take a look at it, and we had not gone out on the site to see if everything was working properly. And so we go out there, and I was actually amazed. There's a bioswale that runs along that property edge. Actually, this is the bioswale I'm talking about. And there actually had been some some runoff from some event on the asphalt, but it had actually been taken care of by that bioswale and by the planting in it, and you could actually see how it had been taken care of, and how the vegetation had sort of effectively scrubbed it, and there was no oil sheen that was running down this bioswale, which was most interesting, and kind of a happy event to see it working. We had no idea. That's one of the weaknesses of what we've been doing with a lot of developers is there's no sort of monitoring process. We don't have that. We don't have any tools to do on-site monitoring.
Yeah, the only tool we have is obviously whenever they do any landscaping, you know, we take bonding and security for that. The security won't be released until 2 years. But actually, when we went back out there, you can see it here. There's this one. You can see the drying out and some back. So Gary, I don't know if I can't recall whether there's a lot of replanting that had to go on, because by and large the water from the site, plus I think they had supplemental irrigation to get the vegetation established, took care of that. That tree buffer that Gary was showing earlier, I don't see if we can see it on here. This tree buffer along here, the original plan for the development was to remove a lot of that vegetation and plant something new. And Gary worked with the landscape architect to incorporate the existing trees in there. And by grading a lot of the parking lot to let it sheet flow off onto there, you have established trees, they're used to receiving water, they're doing the same thing. You reduce the landscape irrigation costs for the developer. So that $300,000 premium to doing this project at the start, he's going to realize some savings over the years by reducing his irrigation costs. It's a great marketing tool for him as well.
One of the things that I've started to kind of realize through these discussions and sort of some of the work we've done with other projects is that there's an aesthetic to doing this. Stormwater management. It's not just a bioswale or a catchment area. It can actually take on an aesthetic design quality, and in this case here, where Dean was just talking about the sheeting of the water, what's happened is when the architect designed this building, all the office windows face out to this tree buffer, and it actually creates a very interesting space when you're looking out, and it really gives the office this kind of premium office space along that edge, and also. Stormwater management, like we have to use the roof, and although Greg was willing to try the green roof concept, the owner wasn't willing to go there. But he didn't the architect didn't sort of let that go. He held that concept, and so the roof water comes through the sluice box, which is tied in, as I mentioned, the history, the kind of context, and then it. Unfortunately, this is pipe. It was supposed to actually be an open.
There's a subgraded bottom.
Yeah, because they're afraid of the water coming up here and back into the fork of the grade is somewhat below. But I've actually been there on major rain events, and this does work. It's a huge cascade of water. It looks pretty cool. There's another sort of how you design with stormwater management. We couldn't quite get what we were looking for with the green roof potentially, but the architect has embraced the concept of the rainwater, and I think he's kind of taken it to an asset rather than a negative.
Just some other views. Here again is the as Gary was mentioning, the sluice box and the dry creek bed. Yes, there is a pipe in there. It's set obviously above where the shot rock is. So by and large, until you get an extreme rain event, it is running through the rock. The subdrain is there to give it an easier way out if you start getting exposed up to an elevation that will potentially backwater into the foundation drains or anything around the building. So it's there as sort of a fail-safe.
Yeah. Okay, I think one of the things I want to sort of impart here, sort of share, is the fact that the collaboration is ongoing now. With that team, we're finding with all the projects that come forth, I mean, we don't really have any sort of bylaws in place. We have some, but we don't have the bylaws to the level to say, demand a green roof, or do a lot of these alternative methods. But these folks are actually, when they come in with their client, they're talking about those issues. And that ongoing collaboration, I mean, in this case, we're actually very constable with that team are developing a lead gold office. And what he's doing with his contractor's office, he's going to actually showcase every bit of green technology. His idea is to give the people who walk in, who want his services, a menu and say, this is what's happening in my building. Here's the bioswale. This is how it works. There's a pervious pavement. There's an intensive green roof. There's an extensive green roof. And what he's done, what these discussions, it's been interesting how part of these discussions have led to Dean's erosion sediment control initiative.
Yeah, well, by and large, what we always find is people want to legislate to get works done. Now, they want to have a bylaw. They want to do something. It's been my experience that when you find that you can have a dual purpose for what you do, you end up getting further ahead. I mean, up here they've got their soil depth bylaw. We looked at that. We said, that's might be a method to mandate it. But what we're looking at is trying to encourage erosion and sediment control. If one of those methods just so happens to be that they compost and mix all over their site, and they get a depth of 4 inches of that, you're really getting some soil onto that site as well. When the builder comes in, scrapes it off, stockpiles it off the side, spreads it back out over his lot, now got 6 inches on his property. So we're sort of taking a backdoor approach to trying to achieve the same as what they're doing up here with their policy. So you always try to look at where something will have a multiple purpose, and as I say, make sure you succeed in what you're doing, because that allows you to push the envelope a little further. Kevin, would you like to speak to somewhat about the interrelationship between Inland Kenworth and
Yeah, so at the time, Courtney didn't know this was going on down in Nanaimo. And the linkage here is that Toyota dealership came to Courtney and wanted to build a new facility. Fortunately, what happened here is we started to talk to that developer through planning and building, etc., and asked for things. And he said, you don't need to ask, I'll do them. And so this was strange from a developer offering to do things. But what had happened was down in Nanaimo, Greg Constable and Island West Developments Limited had done this work in Nanaimo. So for the Toyota dealership, we have no stone drainage connection. There's no stone drainage pipe. There are bioswales, there are rain gardens, and there are car parking lot areas which drain into the grass areas and the natural trees around. So we haven't gone a step further than they have, but we've actually built on the work that was done in Nanaimo, which was a real pleasure for us to deal with this development. What's come out of that is we now use that as a bit of a showcase of the developments in Courtney, say, don't say it can't be done, we'll show you where it has been done, and build on that. So there's the linkage, and there's a synergy as well.
And from there, obviously, it's gone down to the Cowichan Valley with the Mouse dealership there, and it's coming back full circle to us, actually really completed the circle, because Inland Kenworth moved off of Kenworth Road to their site. Now Tom Harris is looking at moving on to the Inland Kenworth site, and guess who's the contractor? Greg Constable. So it's really come full circle in that as well.
And from a staff perspective, it's been kind of interesting. This has been showcased a number of times. It's won both a design award and an environmental award from the city. But more than that, we've been working. I have a colleague that's in the community planning, environmental planner, Rob Lawrence. Been working with him in the University of Vancouver Island University. It's hard to get used to that new name. Yeah. But we've been working with them, and we've been actually working with them, because of sort of how well we've done on this project and how the city's committed to going green. We're actually working with them to do a monitoring program for green roof, and we're looking at our conference center as being one of the monitoring stations for a portion of it being retrofitted green roof. With Greg Constable's new office building, he's actually, the college is going to be, or the university will be monitoring it, the green roof, for seeing how good of a carbon sequester feature it can be. They actually got a research project being developed on that. And we're currently working with the Center of Community Studies at the university to put together some green courses so that the tradespeople, for consultants, and for the general public. And we just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago. There was representatives from various public works, Duncan and Parksville. So this thing has created a whole pile of initiatives with no so-called bylaws or sort of administration per se. Although we are looking, with Bill 27, we're going to be adjusting our efficient community plan to embrace a lot of the green stuff that we have done. So our development permit will then talk about building siting for solar gain. We'll look at minimum measures that have to be in place for storm rainwater management, and the type of landscaping and all those kinds of things, so to deal with hydrology, etc.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Gary. Just seems to be the bad news again. Black Chevy 0687E. Anybody driving that? They should move it. It's going to be relocated otherwise. Thank you.
Yes, correct.
Got a question to the city and Kevin and Courtney. Both projects are commendable. How did you deal with drainage development cost charges? I know for sure the city had them. I'm assuming Courtney had DCCs.
On this project, they continued to pay the
So they paid full DCCs?
Yes.
City of Courtney, my recollection is they didn't pay a connection charge, they didn't pay DCC.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually to talk sort of what Graham was mentioning, what the city's doing is in the new year with the new council, we'll be looking at reduction of development cost charges for green strategies.
Any further questions or comments?
I'll just add a comment. You're familiar with the dockside green development in Victoria? That was one of their strategies for paying for a lot of the green sort of initiatives they did. They handled it on site. They got City of Victoria on site, getting rid of the NCC charge. I think they did that for storm and sanitary services. So that entire really large development, they paid no storm or sanitary DCC, which helps cover the cost of a more expensive system.
And in Nanaimo, as I say, getting back to our risk tolerance and the issue of how do you incent a developer to do this? It's difficult to incent a developer to do this, to say, we want you to do all this on site, but we still want the pipe storm sewer system off the road. But the other issue is if this fails on site, 5 years after the developer's gone, you've got no recourse of going back after the developer, and that's where the risk tolerance of your organization has to kick in. So for us, we're saying, no, we're still looking at building piped systems of the road right away. There are some subdivisions where we would have a row of lots backing onto a wetland, water course, whatever, where we'll put it in the ground and let it go out in that direction. Those lower lots don't have storm sewer service or piped system. We have the pipe to pick up anything that would be upstream of the road, because we don't necessarily want the water going into the ground, running through our road base. It's going to deteriorate roads, that sort of thing. If it fails, it doesn't work, the city's going to be out there 10 years later at the taxpayer's expense trying to fix it. So it's all individual communities and what your risk tolerance is on that.
Actually, we were at Langford and we were amazed at the risk tolerance that they have. It's huge. It's way out there. In some cases, because of their soil conditions, they're not even putting pipe in the road. They're just and they've got a whole development where our municipality wouldn't be going, but they seem to be comfortable taking on huge.
Because what we found is we've actually had to push back at some of the developers. We have a developer that's coming in to develop a relatively high elevation property against all rock. As early as, or as late, I should say, as earlier this spring. We had to go up because where all the stormwater would be discharging, it comes out of a pipe into an open ditch. Well, we've had some ongoing calls for service from a property 150 meters down the road that says every time it rains, my backyard floods out. Well, we put some dye into our ditch, when it rained, guess where it came out? Into his backyard, because it was a ditch that had been carved into the rock, and the water was getting into fissures and coming out across the road and flooding out somebody's. So the city's out there lining that ditch with concrete and putting stones in there to try to prevent that from happening. So that totally changes the focus on what we're going to be doing up on that site. Retention on there to put it into the ground, not a good idea. We had another developer who wanted to do small lot subdivision on a hillside. We asked what his geotech report was. Well, his geotech report stated that, oh, I've got, meter and a half of soil over top of till. Okay, great. You're going to be cutting roads into this. You're going to be cutting in for foundations and everything else. Where's that water going to pop up? It's going to go in the ground, get into the foundation drains, and we're going to have flooding. We've also got developed lands between there and the ocean, right through its flow path, or I guess it's Wally Creek, between there, and so we're going to be flooding out an existing neighborhood if we allow this developer to do that uphill. That's probably not a good situation to be doing. We still need to do some retention and detention on site. He ended up going with underground line storage facility so it wouldn't get into the ground. I had a meeting yesterday morning with a prominent developer in town who lives outside of our jurisdiction, who was complaining that when they had constructed a retail strip mall, that ever since then he's been having problems. He's been noticing cracking around his foundation and stuff that had never occurred in the past. Well, anecdotally, what he's saying is the water that gets discharged from that site, it's still held at pre-development levels, and we've actually diverted some flow, so the volume is the same as what was coming off that site in the past. It's a ditch system, runs about 150 meters. The ditch continues, but the water doesn't. It's getting into the ground. So where's that water going? The geotech engineer is stating that there's, a certain layer, then you get down to some till below there, you got the quadra sand, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, in that jurisdiction, they're finding they're getting sand in their wells right now. So always putting something into the ground, water into the ground, may or may not be the solution. And that gets back to the risk tolerance, right? Yes?
You say that there's a pipe for that failure. Where is that pipe going to?
That pipe discharges into the wetland.
So it goes straight into the wetland?
Yeah. But of course, there's the storage capacity below that pipe. And when you're hitting that pipe going into wetland, you're under an extreme rainfall condition anyway, which is probably 100-year rainfall event. So in that situation, you're going to expect that there's going to be some flooding, there's going to be some elevated groundwater or elevated surface water. Because right now our standard specs call for, even with our standard specifications, the pipe system is designed with 1 in 5-year rainfall event. Major flow routes are on the surface.
We've actually had some major rain events, and we haven't had any negative things come out. So we had one.
Actually, one of Tom's projects after this was, and I'm not going to go back to this slide, but the city had a little arm twisting done by some senior governments who actually built a section of Boxwood Creek. Is that what it's called, Tom? That was so. I mean, the city came out, and instead of piping a creek as we had during DC, I think it was DCC project as well, we actually built an open channel. We've done that on some of the other developers. We had a developer at the north end of town actually again the Showcase and Innovation Series, where it was a farmer's field. All the drainage discharged across the farmer's field. There was Lindley Creek. We had him actually do a man-made creek around the perimeter of his site. Actually quite an attractive development in the area. So.
Actually, one of the interesting things we found when Dean said you got to keep your flows in the pre-development state flows. That's one of those things that usually gets that team happening, because a lot of people that we deal with don't really know how to manage that. That usually gets the city sitting down with the developers team.
You'll notice what was absent on this one was a geotech. I mean, generally speaking, when you start talking about doing retention on site, you need some geotech information on that property.
Great. Well, thanks, guys.
Well, it's good timing. if you hadn't noticed, one of my roles here is equal timekeeper. I'm also playing the role of the Seinfeld soup Nancy, so we're going to break for lunch here tonight, and be back at quarter after 1 sharp, I guess. We'll see. Do you have any wrap-up comments before we break?
No, other than that, I hope that this has helped set the way of thinking for the afternoon when we were truly getting into the town hall segment. And this was good because you were interacting with Gary and Dean, but as we get into the afternoon segment, it will be much more